This is Stephen Reed from the University of Southern California. Today I'm going to show you how to create a project in Emergent basically from scratch using the Libra wizard. Now when you start Libra, you'll see these windows in front of you, and there are two different ways you can create a new project in Emergent. One, you can go up to the File menu and choose New Project. The other is you can click on this icon. Okay, when you click on the icon or select New Project, it will give you a number of different choices for possible constructions of networks. Okay, now some of them are what's called self-organizing, constraint satisfaction, backpropagation, and what we're interested in is Libra. Now in Libra there are three different ways you can construct a Libra project. Libra blank, basically you start from scratch with a completely empty Libra project. Libra Flex allows you to build extremely flexible projects, but it takes a lot of work in programming. Libra Standard builds a standard network for one particular problem, but it's highly unlikely that this is going to be useful for your particular project. So what we're going to look at is we're going to start with Libra Blank and how to use that. So when you click on Libra Blank, what you're going to get, and here let me expand the window a little bit, you now notice you get a left panel that says Tools, and this has all sorts of different pieces for programs if you want to do your own programming. You have a window that says Libra Blank that lists various components of your Libra project, although you'll notice at this point there's not much here. It says Programs, but there's nothing here. It says Networks, but there's nothing under the Network folder. And then in the middle you have the Emergent Wizard. And there are two things to notice about the Emergent Wizard. First, at the bottom you actually have these three drop-down menus. One's called Network, one's called Data, and one's called Programs. And this is how you create the network you want to create, the data tables and data you want to create, and the programs that will run the project. You'll also notice, though, if you look in this dialog box, this Emergent Wizard, you basically get what you'll discover is you get choices that actually correspond to these drop-down menus. Now if you want to, you could do a standard everything, and what this will do is it will create everything all at once. Okay, so it'll create the standard network, standard data, and the standard programs all at once. But what we're going to do is we're going to create each one of them separately. So first we're going to go drop down here, although you could also do the same thing in this central window. You'll click on Network, and you'll see it says Standard Everything or Standard Network. It also has other kinds of things, other kinds of networks that'll mean more to you later, but these are different kinds of network architectures you can build that are fairly sophisticated but fairly specific. Hippo is a hippocampal memory. Other kinds of layers you might want to construct. And this is something that's going to be useful. Update input data from network. This will actually modify things like the structure of your data table, etc. But what we want to do here is we just want to create standard network. We do that, it says how many layers do we want. Let's say 3. And then what it does is it gives us this panel, and it says here are 3 different layers. There's a layer called input, one called hidden, one called output. They're called types of input, hidden, and target. Here are the sizes. They're all 5 by 5. And then receiving projections is really important because this is how you tell the network how it's going to be wired. So in our case, say we're trying to build a network that's going to learn to classify animals on the basis of features. Well, we could basically say, okay, that's going to be called features. We're going to keep the middle layer called hidden. That's pretty standard. And then we're going to call it, the output layer is animals. And then the type This is very important because it tells the program what function this layer plays, or how this layer works in this network. Input layers of type input is where you apply input data from the environment. Hidden layers basically only get connections from the input in the target layer. Target layer is where you basically apply information to the network about the actual correct responses. Size is basically where you design the size of your network. So in this case, we're basically going to say, well, let's say we're going to have 10 input features, and is a 10 by 1 matrix. The hidden layer will still be 5 by 5, and the output layer, let's say it's going to be 5 by 1, which means we have 5 animals. And then the question is, how do we wire this up? Well, the hidden layer doesn't get any projections. I'm sorry, the feature layer doesn't get any projections because it's an input layer. The hidden layer gets projections from the input layer, or features, but the hidden layer in a bidirectionally connected network will also get connections from the target layer, in this case called animals. Okay? And then the animals layer, or the target layer, gets connections from the hidden layer. Now, it's important when you put in these projections that you use the names that you put over here and not the type. So now, this is what we've done. I say OK, and it now creates a network that looks like this. 10 nodes across, hidden layer 5 by 5. You'll notice that there are connections. There's a line that goes from this input layer or feature layer to the hidden layer, and then you have lines going both directions between hidden and animal. You'll notice over in this particular panel, that you now have, under the networks, you now have all this information that's filled in, and basically you now have these different pieces of information. So you now have specs, which is information that defines the different characteristics of the different of the layers, the nodes in the layer, the biases in the layer, which you'll learn about later, the connections, which are basically where information is stored about learning rate. And then you also have layers, which basically corresponds to the structure of the network. So you have something called features, hidden, and animals, and you'll notice it says underneath it, says like hidden, it says you've got projections, and it has projections from features and animals, which is how we wired it up. And animals has projections from the hidden layer, which is again how we wired it up. And that's the other information. Okay, you'll notice, by the way, that in the middle, this panel right here, there's a panel that corresponds to the characteristics of the network itself. And if I actually clicked on layers, it would change, and that would now give me information about the features layer. Okay, and actually what I'm going to do to give me a little more room, I'm going to close this control panel, the tool panel. Okay. So now, at this point, I have the whole network, but you'll notice I don't have anything under programs, and I don't have, if I click on data, there's no data to train the network. So now what I need to do is I need to go back to LibreWizard and say, okay, I want to create standard data, which is going to create standard input and output data tables that are configured so that they match the characteristics of the network. And then what I also want to do here is it asks me when I create a new data table, how many patterns do I want to start with? I can always add more patterns. So now what happens, you'll notice input data now all of a sudden has something called standard input data underneath it, and it can be, I could say I'm going to give it different animals like cat, dog, fish, horse. I could give it, I could decide what are different features, so that this might be meows, likes fish, or dog, this could be barks, etc. And then this output, this animals matrix, these entries correspond to the identity of this. So maybe I want this node to correspond to, this is a cat, and this is dog. Whoops. This would be fish, and then this would be horse. Okay, so now I have data tables, I have the structure of the network, but I don't have any way to train it or run the network. So again, what I do is I go back to LibreWizard, go under Programs, and it says Standard Programs. And I click on that, and now I get the programs that will run the network. So in particular, batch calls train, and train is basically the program you're going to be most interested in, that is basically going to be responsible for taking the data from the input data table, applying it to the network, and then learning basically the relationship between the features and the input, the features in the feature layer, and the nodes in the animal layer. So that's basically how you would create your own emergent network with its own characteristics. So as I said, this one you created your own layers, etc. Now one other thing I'll mention at this point, you can, after you build a network, decide that you want to change the size of a layer, configuration, things like that. So this layer is a 5x5 layer. Maybe for some reason I only want a 4x4 layer. I can click on this, and I will now get a dialog box, and it will now, in here, it will say unit geometry, and it says 5x5, which is the size of this layer. So now I want to say, okay, let's make it 4x4. I go down here and I say apply, and you'll now notice that it's changed this, and you've got these extra spaces in here. Okay. Now, but one of the things you'll notice is you've got this empty space and the frame doesn't fit. Now, if I try to run the program, say init, basically what will happen is I'm going to get a configuration error. It's basically saying you haven't properly configured the hidden layer yet. You changed its size, and you didn't properly configure it. What you typically need to do if you change the size or configuration of a layer is you need to go to, under Networks, you find the line that corresponds to the particular network you're working on. Click on that, and then you'll get a button down here that says Build, and what you do is you click on that, and that will properly build the network and set everything up properly. Now if I go back to Train and go init, it's actually going to try to do something. Okay, so basically that's how you construct your own network in Libra.